Hey, good morning, everybody. Law and Legitimacy. You did it. You hung through the week, and now it's Friday. And if you're lucky, you won't have rain this weekend, or a tornado, or other extreme weather, or people from foreign lands at your door saying, "Give me a place in your home," or nitwit political commentators saying, "Vivek Ramaswamy, he's too consistent to be Vivek Ramaswamy, he's too consistent to be meaningful." The assault on Vivek, who is a dark horse candidate in the Republican primaries, continues, and the heat goes on. What happened this week, Mike? Something caught your eye that had you pretty wound up.
Well, it didn't really have me wound up. I think that maybe the better way to go about it is just to acknowledge that the opposition is building against Vivek, and not that that's not something that he shouldn't have expected or doesn't expect. I think he certainly does. But what is really interesting to me is that the opposition thus far, I mentioned it on a previous stream, Norm, has really tried to pursue ad hominem routes of criticism. There isn't a lot of criticism of his ideas. In fact, I don't know that I've seen any legitimate criticism of the ideas that he's brought forth. And these ideas are, they go across all bounds, right? Economic bounds, militaristic bounds, administrative state, spiritual, even. And I think there are a lot of people, especially young people in my position, that are paying attention that love what we're hearing. But what was really interesting to me is yesterday, and I want to give credit. I don't know if any of his people ever watch our stream. I think they should.
Yeah, I do too. And I think Vivek needs to be a guest on Law and Legitimacy, although he doesn't know it yet. We'll give him an opportunity to earn yet more criticism from people who want to criticize him.
That's right. That's right. But his team does a great job of activating X, paying attention to the conversations and watching for the criticism, and in particular, watching for misinformation or disinformation, depending on what you would consider that. But in particular, people that would say that he has a Soros connection, not realizing that the Soros connection is a distant brother of George Soros. It's not George Soros that would ever be a connection. And it was as his being a recipient alongside 100 other people of a scholarship for a certain program years ago. Remember, Vivek is only 38 years old. He just turned 38 years old. He's 5 years older than I am. So it's not as though that there are, I think about the way that I'm evolving into a young man at this point.
No. You're evolving into a middle-aged man.
Nah. Hey, Uncle Pat. Good morning. Morning, freedom lover. Right.
Yeah. So Freedom Lover raises a good point, though. He says, Vivek's books say things opposite of what he's saying now. I want to trust him, but he's not sure. I mean, Freedom Lover, I've got one of Vivek's books sitting on a shelf unread, and I guess I should address that one of these days. But I'm less concerned with consistency for consistency's sake than I am with coherence and grappling with issues as they emerge. And so I'm looking for a person who's open-minded, asking the right questions, and is open to changing his or her mind when presented with enough data or enough information such that a change of mind is required. Consistency for consistency's sake, that's a good tool for logicians, necessary in math. But was it G.K. Chesterton who once said that consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds? I'm not saying that complexity in and of itself or contradiction is necessary. I think Whitman once said, "Do I contradict myself? I'm vast. I contain multitudes. So be it." Vivek is no poet either. I get that. But I do think that I do think it's an unfair criticism for Gina Bontempo and others to say, there's something off. He's intelligent, but he sounds like he's saying exactly what he knows the right wants to hear, regardless of whether he believes it. Is that what he's doing, Gina? Or is he talking about a world in which some of the values and some of the things that he sees missing in the world are things that others on the right also agree with? And are you accusing him of pandering to his base while pandering to your own?
Well, Norm, I find this wildly cynical coming from the side of the political spectrum that right now, we do this stream every morning because there is a real breakdown in the pluralistic mentality of the average American citizen, right? Our institutions have never been more illegitimate perceptibly. And I think that for the political right, especially when in regard to a candidate that has been largely supportive of Donald Trump throughout this and is the only one that shows up to the courthouse. He is the only one that calls to condemn the charges as they come down, regardless of which indictment it ultimately is. He's the only one trying to circle the wagons around the candidate that he knows has the hardened base on the political right. And he also realizes who he is, and he's not making any sort of concessions as to where he wants to go with his candidacy. I think I saw a comment somewhere that struck a chord with me. You know, he's worth north of $600 million. He's a political outsider. He's not here for the fun of it, right?
No, I hear you.
There are plenty of other things that he could be doing to make money. But again, he's 38. And when I read something like this is really the reason I wanted to bring it up. When Patrick Bet David did his town hall with Vivek, and I talked about that a little bit on this stream, he said something he did that video at the end after it was over where he was Patrick Bet David did, while he was smoking his cigar and kind of giving a message to establishment media and saying that this is basically your last hurrah. Politics has forever changed. You know, the political outsiders are one thing, but the technology and the mechanisms by which candidacies are launched and run and grown has changed. And I think that what Gina may, and respectfully, Gina thinks what she thinks, and she's entitled to that opinion. But what I think I resonate with the genesis of this idea, Norm. I think if I am wired to have the same level of sort of skepticism or curiosity about the intentions of someone who is as polished and as consistent and is saying the right things. But in this day and age, what I've known is that if you are an early adopter of anything, you are going to have to acclimate yourself to hearing the same message over and over and over. And the reason that is because the person or the product or the service that you may have adopted before the larger swath of the population has, well, they haven't heard those messages yet.
Or put another way, your advertising dollars need to promote your brand across the broadest possible set of demographics. Why, for example, does Coca-Cola still advertise? Because some people haven't heard of it, and some people need to be brought around. And if Vivek has ideas that he wants to put into the marketplace of ideas, he has to peddle them whenever he's in that market.
Well, and I think that he's saying really important things. I think that the way that he has framed his campaign, the spirit of his campaign, it's like listening to an album for the first time. And the first time that certain song hits you, it's transcendent. But every time you listen to it after that, it's a little less of what it was that first time around. And I think that we are so geared for the timeline and scrolling for what is the newest thing here and there across any medium, that rather than pointing the gun at Vivek here and saying, you know, there's something off about him, perhaps that is a sign of the success of a ubiquitous political campaign that has not had to rely on mainstream media to reach some sort of critical mass with the demographics that are most likely to vote with him and vote for him. It seems more obvious to me that we need to back off of thinking that he's the underdog, right? This is a signal. I mean, think about the frame of reference from which Gina is approaching this question. There's something off about Vivek. Well, that's a recognition that he's got some leverage over this election, whether you like it or not, whether you want that or not. To me, this is, humbly, the wrong way to think about it. I think this is a very positive sign for where his campaign is going to go from here, because this is already happening.
Well, let's watch. I mean, we like him. The ideas that he begins to that appeal to him, at least from my perspective, he's got a sense of the transcendent and the so-called God-shaped hole in people's heart. Their need to find meaning in something other than satisfaction to their appetites. He's got a view of limited government. He's got a view of the deep state, the need to check it and to get control of administrative agencies. He's got sophisticated ideas of foreign policy. He seems to be paying attention to the broader world, and he's paying attention. That's enough for me. Dawn asks, how do we know if a politician is genuine? I am always reminded of the great 1930-something classic by Harold Laswell, Psychopathology and Politics. He was one of the first American political scientists to apply Freud's teaching about the unconscious to politics in general. And Laswell's position was, of course, anybody who runs for office at that level's got a few screws loose, rather. That's why they put up with the aggravation of running. So I don't think the real question, Dawn, is how do we know whether a politician is genuine? I think the question is, how do we know that the politician in front of us reflects things that are important to us, and can that person advance interests and ideals that we hold dear?
I'm open to being wrong, Norm. I think I pointed Vivek out early on because he's saying the things that need to be said, and he's using the big R word, revolution.
Yeah,
he's talking about a political revolution. And I sent you a text yesterday that we're not going to talk about right now. Vivek, that would be bloodshed.
No, I wouldn't even watch that.
If you want to see a dead body in a metaphorical sense, Justin, yeah, put DeSantis on the same.
That's right out there with dwarf tossing. I mean, Justin, have you been dropped on your head recently? That's an outrageous comment.
You want to see Vivek a dead body?
Yeah. Hey, let's pivot. Craig Robinson, the murder or the killing, rather.
Well, and I think this is a great transition, right? Because who is the one candidate that's saying that the FBI needs to be completely defunded?
Vivek Ramaswamy.
Okay, let's move into this.
So Craig Robinson, you'll recall, was killed yesterday in Provo, Utah. According to press accounts, he's either 60 or 74 or 75. Whatever it is, he's in his mid-70s, or was in his mid-70s. And he was prone to vitriolic, even hateful speech about the right. He'd made comments hostile and expressing a desire to see dead the likes of Gavin Newsom, Letitia James, Kamala Harris, Joe Biden. He was paid a visit by the FBI in March in response to some of his speech that was posted under his name, in particular one in which he had a dream that he had seen some dead politicians. They came to his home, they questioned him. He said, "It was a dream, people. I posted the dream." They sought to ask him more questions. He said, "Get out of here, come back with a warrant." Thereafter, he posted notes on social media saying, to my friends at the FBI, I know you're watching. Do you realize how close you came to being exterminated? Clearly chilling sentiments, angry sentiments that suggest he may be prepared to engage in violence, may not. Biden was scheduled to visit and did visit Utah apparently this week. The day before, Mr. Robertson posted that it was time to get out an old camouflage uniform that he had and to dust off his M24 sniper rifle. It might be a good time for assassinations of Joe and Kamala. Now, question, does that amount to a true threat within the meaning of the law? Our courts have held that true threats are imminent threats of violence that create a substantial likelihood in the recipient, in the hearer, that they will be the subject of an act of violence. This is right. This is close to the line. I'm not sure it crosses the line, even under the new case. The Colorado case. I'm drawing a blank on the individual's name that was decided just in June.
Counterman? No.
Yeah, Counterman. Yeah, Counterman versus Colorado. Counterman said that a true threat is a threat that places in the recipient a reasonable expectation or fear of violence, and that the utterer has to know that their speech is likely to have that effect or could have that effect. I'm not sure this satisfies that definition, but a magistrate judge apparently signed off on an arrest warrant after FBI's did a criminal complaint to arrest Mr. Robertson prior to Biden's coming to town. Now you're thinking, wait a minute, I thought you had to be arrested by way of a grand jury in the United States. Isn't that what the Constitution says? Well, it does, but as with every other bright line rule, there are exceptions. And one is when there is an imminent or quick or near risk of harm, agents don't have to convene a grand jury. They can swear out an affidavit, show it to a judge and say, we need to take this person into custody now, and he can have a grand jury later. Armed with such a criminal complaint and a search warrant, agents appeared at Mr. Robertson's home yesterday at or about dawn. I've seen, and you probably all have seen now, video footage of officers, there it is, behind a vehicle, dressed in military garb, in close formation, approaching the home, demanding that he come out. The video ends with a flash bang. Neighbors who took the video were probably so alarmed they ducked for cover, and we don't see what happens next. I've been trying to follow press accounts of this, and I have read a claim that Robertson opened fire on the officers as they approached his home. If that's true, I don't think the law prohibits the officers from returning fire. But I want to ask a larger question. Did we really need a SWAT team to descend on this old man's home in the dead of an early morning because he'd uttered vitriolic speech about the President of the United States? We are deeply divided. And I suspect if you go online, you'll see a lot of speech like that. And if that is all a true threat, if that is all sufficient to muster a federal response of the sort that resulted in Robertson's death, then anybody who's intemperate in their speech has a potential death warrant signed against them. I remind folks that the Fourth Amendment protects us in our home. The castle doctrine says, a man's home is his castle. And there is a strict limit on what the federal government can and can't do. You cannot enter it without a warrant, and a warrant requires a legal justification. In the Robertson case, his death means we'll never really get a judicially tested opinion about whether his speech was in fact a true threat. I would suggest to you that it was not. That it's right on the line. The First Amendment permits vitriolic speech. It permits mere abstract calls for violence at some future date. In a famous decision arising at the time of the Vietnam War, I think it may have been the Watts decision, one individual was arrested after a anti-war protest saying, the first person who's going to be in my sights is going to be LBJ. I ain't going to fight in that war for him. And so the person was arrested for a threat, and the court said, no, that's protected speech. Even vile speech is protected. If we're going to impose a civility test on speech in the United States, we're going to forever transform the character of political debate. We're going to forever transform what it is that we can safely say without interference from government. Now, on the other hand, Robertson's speech does suggest that he was familiar with weapons, that he was motivated, and that he had viewed with satisfaction the potential death of federal officials, and that he had the means, and perhaps with Biden's coming to Utah, the opportunity to make good on his dreams, to make good on his threats. Having said all that, I'm still not sure it's a true threat, and I expect the Robertson case will be deeply, deeply politicized in the years to come, that his name will loom as large in our public debate about the nature and limits of public authority as Randy Weaver's did at Ruby Ridge. Because in a way, we're all Mr. Robertson. We all have deeply held views about politics in this country, or you wouldn't be listening to this, or you wouldn't be on this show right now. The notion that it's time for an assassination, it's troubling to me, but candidly, I'll tell you, Mike and I have privately wondered, whether that time is rapidly approaching in American politics again.
So I want to get to a couple of things. Number one, I don't think it would be a mistake if Craig Robertson's name rose to the level of prominence that you just described. And I'm reluctant to engage in whataboutism, but it's easy to look back at the past several years, in particular when Trump was in office, and to hear people of very public prominence talk about the need to take Donald Trump out in various ways. Johnny Depp being one of those that was very public. When's the last time an artist assassinated a president? I think is his quote.
Well, so the question, was that a true threat?
And I don't think it is, but if I'm willing to say that, I think that the issue that I see here, Norm, is that the FBI is able to lean into the establishment sentiment that people who have the capacity to do the things that they say have less of a First Amendment right.
I hear you. It does. No, it does. I'm wincing because I think it's an extremely close call,
Well, maybe, but here's what I wanted to get to, because there's a couple of things. Uncle Pat, good morning. He's referencing Mar-a-Lago with this, sent SWAT to Trump's place. Again, heavy-handed. And then Dawn says, is this raid part of a larger pattern of heavy-handed MAGA types, Roger Stone, the abortion guy, etc.? This is, I think, the answer to the question, knee-jerk, to me is yes, Norm. And it's hard to argue against that. The FBI has been non-existent when it comes to I guess, yeah, Madonna, Justin, great point. The FBI is really faulty these days. And it seems like it is a very bloated agency. And it seems as though at the points that Americans would expect them to be effective in securing national interests, they're not there. Enter the Pulse nightclub shooting and any other example you want to use. And then when you've got a 75-year-old man who cares for his blind son, uses a cane, and then is rambunctious with his use of Facebook, right? You're sending SWAT early in the morning to his house rather than maybe trying to initiate a stop on his way to church on Sunday. This to me seemed like there was an expectation. Obviously, you're not sending a SWAT team to somebody's house if you're not expecting some indulgence to violence.
Well, yeah. So no, let's focus on this case and let's watch the investigation unfold. I hope it's a public investigation, because we can all stand to be educated by when force is justifiably used. One definition of the state, Max Weber's definition of the state is that entity that has a monopoly on the legitimate use of force. That is, it can use deadly force to protect its interest and the safety of its residents and others. Was this justified? We'll find out. New law review article published last night, and it's a must read. A friend of mine sent it to me about 10 o'clock last night. I opened it when I woke up in the middle of the night and read about 60 pages of it. Mike was complaining that it's long. At 124 pages, it weighs in as a mid-sized booklet, and is must reading for everyone. The Section 3 of the 14th Amendment carries with it a disqualification clause, and it says that any person who has previously sworn an oath to protect and defend the Constitution and then engages in insurrection or rebellion or offering aid and comfort to those who so engage in insurrection and violence is forever disqualified from holding office in the United States unless Congress, by a 2/3 vote, restores their right to serve. This is Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, passed after the Civil War, and was designed, or passed, I should say, at the time to deal with the problem of repatriation of former Confederate officials. According to the Law Review article, and according to Eric Foner's great book on the Reconstruction Constitution, in the wake of the Civil War, members who supported the lost cause, the South, may have lost the war, but they were going to win the peace by taking high office and reflecting the interests of antebellum or pre-war South in the post-war world. This amendment was designed to say that if you once took an oath to protect and serve the Constitution and defend it, and then turned against it by either acting violently or aiding and comforting those who did, you forfeited forever your right to serve. Question: does this clause live in today's law? And separate question: if it does, what then of Donald Trump? So the authors make a pretty compelling argument, and I think they're right, that once a clause is passed into the Constitution, unless by its own terms, it times itself out. In other words, it becomes extinct through the passage of time. It remains part of the fundamental law of the land. And so they contrast this with the section of the Constitution that prohibited the slave trade to exist for another 20 years, but not thereafter. That piece of the Constitution timed itself out, as it were. Section 3 of the 14th Amendment remains active, and it remains good law. So what do we do with it? They claim that the article, the section rather, is self-enforcing, meaning any person who has a right or a duty or an obligation to enforce the Constitution needs to act on that when they're given an opportunity. And what does that mean? It doesn't mean there are some questions that I haven't finished the article, so maybe I should have saved this till Monday. But they're saying you don't need a separate trial. This isn't like the treason clause, where it talks and contemplates a trial, and a person must be found guilty of punishment, and then that is the punishment. The punishment for treason is Congress is free to prescribe. In this case, once a person has engaged in insurrection or rebellion or offered aid and comfort to those who have, they are by operation of law, the authors contend, disqualified. Thus, any official involved in the electoral process has a constitutional duty to make sure that the person doesn't serve. Where does the rubber meet the road? The rubber meets the road, for example, in Secretary of State's office when it comes time to approving ballots. Suppose you're a Secretary of State in a blue state right now, and you think that based on the January 6th House report, that Donald Trump offered aid and assistance to those who turned with violence against the United States, seditious conspiracists, whether they be Proud Boys, whether they be Oath Keepers, or whether they be others. Then in that case, you would be constitutionally justified in refusing to put Trump's name on the ballot. In and of it's just without more. And so, and their claim is, well, if somebody like Trump feels aggrieved by this, they can obviously go to court and ask the court to compel the Secretary of State to place Trump's name on a ballot. I think that this obviously is must reading in the Trump camp, because what it is a suggestion that maybe, just maybe, Jack Smith's insistence yesterday that Trump go to trial on January 2nd of next year isn't an accident. That insofar as efforts are made to remind people and to press the case that Trump engaged in aiding and assisting those who rebelled against the authority of the United States government, he is disqualified from even running for office, and your vote cannot be cast for him because in terms of the United States Constitution, he's opted out of that particular game. He can never serve again unless Congress approves it. I think that the timing of the prosecution, if Smith gets his way and the trial begins January 2nd, combined with this article and the conclusions the authors reach, suggests that in every jurisdiction in the United States, any public official who is responsible for enforcing electoral law will find a justification to do anything they can to frustrate Trump's presidential candidacy, regardless of the tens of millions of people who may choose to vote for Trump. And so you want to talk about a legitimation crisis. Absolutely. Holy cow.
So this is what I want to put Justin Card as, he had a comment before this one that said timing and opinion, motive. And then the timing of the piece has me skeptical. And I think that that's really the point I think that we're trying to make here, is that of us have made our way through this 126 page law review article in full. But it's interesting enough that it's out here, and the fact that it's published and widespread, but it says that it's forthcoming 2024, I think is enough to have us thinking about what the next move may be in the January 6th prosecution of Trump.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't realize it hadn't been physically published. I know it's available online. It was published last night and immediately found its way into my inbox. So give it a look, folks. It's up there. If you're not, don't be intimidated by all the constitutional mumbo jumbo in there. It's a pretty accessible article as law review articles go. And what a law review article does for you law nerds out there and law students in the making is it spots an issue and it talks about how the issue has been considered in the past, how it might be considered in the future, and it offers proposals on how to apply the law in a new, rapidly and evolving circumstance. And I would suggest to you that 2024 will be the year of litigation as to Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. So stay tuned.
Hans over on Rumble asks, will a red state do the same to Biden?
Well, so what would be the claim? I mean, if somebody's going to activate Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, you would have to claim that the person either engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the United States or offered aid and comfort to those who did. And so if you're going to claim that Biden's policies amount to insurrection or use of violence against the United States, I think you're going to have to go into a court and persuade a court that his political decisions amount to that. And there's some doctrine in court known as the political questions doctrine. And judges, when they consider political questions, decline to assert jurisdiction over those claims. But they say that's really something for voters.
Sort of a business judgment rule equivalent.
Yeah, right? Absolutely. Fundamentally, yes. In a civil context, yeah, business owners are given in an employment at will context, for example, the right to make bad decisions. They don't have to be just. They don't have to be fair. They don't have to be wise. They can use their judgment. And if they're stupid, well, the market will punish them. And I think analogously, the political question doctrine says, politicians don't have to be wise. They don't have to be smart. They can make stupid decisions. And when they do, voters will punish them. But that's for voters to decide. So I think that in terms of this article, this is to the commenter on Rumble. I forgot the name. Hans, I don't think those cases would advance very far in as a matter of law.
Justin is asking if we can find this on your X feed. I'll make sure we post this article on X.
Yeah, it's a good article. I mean, it's, you know, it tells me that we've got a lot more squabbling to come in the next year than even I had imagined.
Any appetite here to hit the Massachusetts migrant stuff really quick?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, the Third Amendment to the United States Constitution, there is one. You know, we've got a first, we've talked about it. We've got a second, we've got a fourth, we've got a fifth, we got a sixth. And those of you who are keeping count are saying, hey, what about me? What about me? What about the Third Amendment? Well, the Third Amendment is, and this is an interesting discussion in my view. The Third Amendment prohibits the federal government from quartering, that is, placing soldiers in a person's home. This is one of the things that outraged the colonists about British rule, is King George would send folks over, you'd get a knock on the door, you know, and here's Major Corpulent Fat, you know, he's going to be sitting at your table for a while. Oh, so pleased to have you, sir. Well, they weren't. And, you know, he was there by royal decree. So we have placed a fundamental limit on government. The government cannot place a soldier in our home. So Massachusetts now has a migrant crisis going on. People are flocking to the Bay State, in part because the Bay State has a provision of state law that says people who are in need of housing must be given it. And so the state has an affirmative obligation to provide housing for anyone within its jurisdiction. It's not necessarily saying the housing of choice, but you know, it's more than nothing. And so resources are running thin, both financially and in terms of the physical plant of the state to house all of the migrants that are arriving. So the governor of Massachusetts has called on state residents to basically volunteer to bring migrants into their home. Got a spare room? Put a family in for a while. Now, presumably the state will pay, you know, for that. But and so questions have arisen online. You know, what about the Third Amendment? And this is sort of like Dobbs versus women's health's revenge. If you're going to claim that the Constitution is one of limited powers and that the text governs what it means, then you can say this is not a Third Amendment problem at all. Because the Third Amendment prohibits quartering of soldiers. Migrants aren't soldiers. And so can the state compel you to place a migrant in your own home? I don't think the state can be prohibited on Third Amendment grounds, but there might be arguments that, look, this constitutes an unjust taking of your property. But remember, the state is not prohibited from taking your property. The state is prohibited from taking your property without just compensation. So if you get a knock on the door from your Bay State census person or immigration counselor saying, we've got the family here from wherever, we're going to give you $1,000 a month to put them in your spare bedroom, that's just compensation. Would they have the right to do that? And I don't think the Third Amendment on its face violates that. And to the degree that you want to say, well, the spirit of the Constitution prohibits the government from compelling us to care for strangers in our own home, you're undoubtedly right. But arguments based on the spirit of the Constitution are easy to ridicule and hard to enforce. Consider the language of Griswold versus Connecticut, the famous contraceptive decision that talked about the penumbra, the emanations, the things at the margins of the Bill of Rights that protected individual sovereignty. So I say, you know, with respect to Massachusetts, we've got an interesting constitutional problem brewing, and I think it's going to be a problem for North America in general in the decade to come. You'll recall some time ago, we had Rex Paris, mayor of Lancaster, California, on the show. And among the things he talked about are briefings that public officials are getting in California about the great surge of migrants to come from Central America and the need to prepare. And we're not prepared. We're not prepared to turn folks away at the border. We're not prepared with the infrastructure to house them. And so what is going to happen in time is, as the number of immigrants increases, especially in cold weather states, you know, in the winter, the need to house them is going to become profound. Are we going to construct camps? Or are we going to resort to the infrastructure we have? And will the government try to find ways to compel individuals to accept payment for the placement of individuals in their home? Good luck with that. I just, I just don't think it's going to happen. But I fear that government when it asks for something, usually starts with a request and ends with a demand. And I wouldn't be surprised to learn that there were people in Massachusetts and elsewhere exploring ways that people can be compelled, let's say, to turn over their vacation home, or if you're a senior and your kids have left the home and it's you and the missus in that 4-bedroom home, why not use 2 of those bedrooms to house a migrant family? What would be the harm, and what would be the mechanism but to force people to do it? I don't want to live in that United States. Don't get me wrong. I'm not encouraging anybody to do it. But insofar as we try to spot problems to come, I view this as a very significant problem.
Well, and it's interesting because we've covered New York City in this context in prior streams, in particular, Mayor Eric Adams. And he has been in the news over the past couple of weeks, sort of extolling the damage of the influx of migrants into the city, discussing the fact that there wasn't the infrastructure or resources to support and laying blame at the feet of those southern border states that have been funneling the migrants into those cities. So we're likely to see the tide turn, I think, on this stuff as well. Daniel, your comment is, of course, relevant to the first part of the stream. Vivek says the right things, and I've long believed that the encroachment of countries south of Mexico, and then Mexico's, I guess, culpability in allowing those people to move through the country to our border is something that needs to be addressed militarily.
But here's the deal, Mike. I hear you, but I just don't see it happening. I don't think we have the appetite for it. I am reminded again and again of Jean Raspail's book, Camp of the Saints. This was an allegory. There was a flotilla of people heading to southern France, or heading to France from India, and the French were worried. What would they do when all these people arrived? Could they accommodate them? And there was a discussion, should we use the military to stop them? And people didn't have an appetite to do so because it didn't reflect their commitment to humane values and caring for others. And it didn't reflect how they felt about themselves. But yet it didn't acknowledge, but yet they refused to acknowledge what would happen if there was a mass influx of people and no infrastructure to support them. So the French did nothing. The wave arrived and chaos ensued.
Well, look, I think that we need to have a serious discussion about what the definition of a soldier is in 2023, at least domestically, because it seems the war that we are fighting at this point is largely digital and is abiding tactics that the average person has not availed themselves of in understanding. It is a series of small skirmishes in a very fragmented and fractionalized way. And I think that the influx of migrants is a component part of America, of what America will be, not what it is, or in any way, shape, or form, according to the existing political regime, according to something that they would like to conserve about America.
Well, let's keep an eye on Massachusetts. I like the headline you gave there. Ask, then tell, housing migrants in Massachusetts. If you're in the Bay State and you've got information on this, give it to us, because I want to follow this story. My hunch is that efforts will be made to compel people to house people who aren't family members. And when that happens, I think the gloves come off. And I think there'll be a lot more Craig Robertsons out there than we care to acknowledge.
I love this. I love this question from Severe Conservative. Any progress on gaining rights to Camp of Saints book? I know it's a serious question.
No, Severe Conservative, not, but I it's on my mind because I think the book has gone out of print. And I think it's a serious discussion that people need to have. And so thank you for reminding me that there's yet another thing that I haven't done that I'm interested in doing.
Last thing here before we get out of here for the weekend. We are doing our inaugural fantasy football season here at Law and Legitimacy called Ball and Legitimacy. We had several of you reach out earlier this week when I made the plug, so we still need a few more people who have interest in joining the league. So if you're watching and you would like to join Norm and me and fellow LELians in a fantasy football league this year, please send an email exploring your interest to pattispodcast@gmail.com. Please include your name and just a quick sentence or two about you, if you watch, why you watch, that kind of thing. We're going to probably send around a Survey Monkey thing just to get some more information. Justin, great. Send an email, please, so we can aggregate everything in the right place. Also, you know how to find us. We're here every weekday, Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. Eastern, Rumble Video, YouTube Live, X Live. If you don't catch us live, you can always catch us while you're in the car, on the train, or just doing yard work or anything domestic around the house, and in the audio-only format on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, Audible, Overcast, wherever you find podcasts. Leave us 5 stars there or leave us alone. Norm, I think we've got plenty of gas in the tank for next week.
I think so. I'm looking forward to it. I feel like we just touched the surface of a lot of interesting issues this week. Of course, I can't wait to go back and finish that law review article. I think that's a fascinating read, and I encourage all of you to get your head into it. I'll post it on Twitter.
Photography says more philosophy, less sports.
Philosophy, life is a competitive game. Life, as Theodore Roosevelt once said, is strife, and the struggle for significance is a philosophical problem. But the struggle for mastery is both philosophical and expressed in sports. And so, sports is about philosophy, as is life. And so, photography. Go Blue. We're a couple weeks out from the University of Michigan's football season. They were rated number 2 in one poll, and we will be talking about the race for the national championship in the NCAA a lot this fall, as we will be crowing about the success of Norm's Wolverines in the Ball and Legitimacy Fantasy Football.
Thank you to everybody over on Rumble this morning. T-Girl, thank you for the information about Vivek. I will go and find the YouTube of his high school graduation speech. Norm, I'll share that with you.
Okay.
Hans, it's me again. Lawyer Will, always nice to see you. Freedom Lover in the cloud. MDMA for PTSD. Love seeing you all in the chat. Please share. Make sure you've liked this stream and you're subscribed. We'll see you on Monday. Norm, have a great weekend.
You too, Mike. Be well.
Bye.